I'm Christoph from Point Blank in Berlin, and we basically do all sorts of, or different kinds of consulting, all based on qualitative research.
I'm Helen King, I'm from Bord Bia. We are the Irish Food Board. We're a government agency. We're responsible for marketing and promoting Irish food abroad.
And I'm Daniel, I'm founder at Bakamo.Social. We find qualitative insights without asking from social media.
Okay, so what is this all about today? Basically, in the spring of 2016, we got a pitch brief from the Irish Food Board.
So we wanted to understand the lamb consumption culture in Germany to help us unlock growth opportunities, both for the Irish Food Board, so we can market Irish lamb across Germany, but also critically to work with our lamb processors so they could understand the culture in Germany and they could themselves grow their businesses.
Okay, so first thing we thought was, we're going to have to look at this from different angles. We're going to have to basically really try and understand, culture. It's a big word. It's a huge endeavor. So this is going to be quite a huge thing. All sorts of ideas are sparking up there, like a kaleidoscope of ideas, basically. We could do some cultural, or should do some cultural inquiry. We should probably, maybe we do some social media listening. We should probably look at the retail level, maybe do some store inquiries. We could do some shopping, some accompanied shopping. We should talk to industry experts. We could probably also do maybe some mobile ethnography or some online community with consumers to see how they shop and consume in their everyday lives. And of course, we need to talk to them in person. So we need to do a couple of group discussions. Wow, this is going to be a huge thing, we thought. This is going to be a huge project, and it will be quite expensive, and it will be quite time-consuming.
But as most of you know, clients usually come to the party with very limited budgets, and this was a project that was not an exception to the rule.
So, what you see on the slide here is our excitement dropping to the floor. So basically we told Helen that this was quite impossible, and we left the project there and then, and this basically concludes our talk. Of course it doesn't. We took on the challenge, and we really started to think hard about how can we actually wing this? How can we understand the lamb consumption culture in Germany on a fairly limited budget and in a fairly limited time? So basically, what brought us here today is to tell you about how we came up with something that we call a supercharged research concentrate. So how did we distill this large brief into something quite succinct and quite efficient? Well, what we actually did was to try and follow 3 principles, and we're going to take you through them through the course of this presentation. The first principle here that we tried to follow was we will actually have to find collaborators. If we want to look at this from different angles, we will have to find the right collaborators, and we will have to work with them quite efficiently throughout the project. The second thing we realized was that we really need to create a narrative flow. I will talk to you about, or we will talk to you about how we actually did this. And lastly, we realized we need to really shape the whole project towards a simple and impactful output. But before I actually go on to tell you how we applied these 3 principles in our project, let's have a look at what we actually did. Now, looking at culture and understanding culture, of course, we needed to understand this particular culture on several levels. So we decided to look on the macro level of really, what is the cultural discourse around lamb? Germans are notoriously cautious around lamb consumption. When you look at the figures, you can see like the Germans are not quite eating as much lamb as other nations do. And we really wanted to understand, there's a couple of prejudices around that. How important are they, and how much of a barrier is there really to lamb consumption in the way people talk about it? So we needed to look at this cultural macro level. Then we wanted to understand the industry level and really understand from experts how they understand lamb, what they see as opportunities and barriers. And of course, we needed to look at the micro level because, yeah, we wanted to talk to consumers. And we focused here on two kinds of consumers, if you will. On the one hand, enthusiasts, where we really tried to find out sort of what got them into lamb. And on the other hand, a group we call cautious skeptics, where, you know, they were open but still a little bit afraid maybe of going into lamb consumption. And we really wanted to find out what's the barriers here, sort of why are they holding back? So, you know, that, again, it sounds like a huge thing. So there's 3 levels, big project. How did we pull it off in a fairly succinct and efficient manner? Well, let's go into these 3 principles that I talked about in the beginning. The first one is, as I said, finding the right partners, finding the right collaborators for this project. We actually decided to do some social media listening in the beginning, and this is where we brought Daniel in from the beginning of the project, and Daniel's going to talk to you in a minute about how he actually sort of integrated the social media listening into our work. And then we also decided right at the beginning that we were going to take a designer on board to help us shape the outcome towards a really simple and impactful output. We're going to look at this in more detail, but here our piece of advice is really try to understand in the beginning what are your partners and then kind of put them in collaboration and really pull off the project together with them throughout. So, the second principle that I talked about in the beginning was try to create a narrative flow. Now, this is the bit where we combine different methodologies and really try to weave them together. So, for us, it was clear from the beginning on that we wouldn't treat the 3 phases of this project as sort of separate phases. You know, very often you do social media listening and then a report is produced. And then maybe you talk to some industry experts and you produce a report on that. And then you go on to do group discussions and again you produce a report. We never kind of considered doing this. What we considered doing is to create a story, one story throughout. So basically, what we found out through the social media listening was to directly flow into the creation of the research design for the industry experts, so basically have our hypotheses travel on, and then from there again come up with hypotheses and bring these into discussions with the consumers. No reporting in between. So this was one of the things how we made it quite efficient. And Daniel is going to talk to you now about the start of that journey and about social media listening.
So what you see here are lots of sheep and people talking. They are just talking. People use social media to say the things when they're in the moment or reflecting on something, but no one pays them, no one asks them, it's unbiased, it's really things sparkle up as they enter the collective consciousness. And the power of social media is that, you know, few people talk, but a lot of them listen. So when someone says something, it actually influences a lot of people. And can I steal the clicker?
Yes, you can.
Excellent. So, yeah, and we use technology to tap into the public social media space. Now, how do we do that? And that's when social media becomes a little bit complicated because you need to think of it, there's this massive amount of data. The numbers reach between 400 million mentions a day to 20 billion. And you basically you need to use the words, the semantic words that people use to sort of step into this pool of data to capture the relevant conversations. Now, lamb is being talked in many different ways in Germany, and this is just a little bit of an example of the actual words and grammatical forms that we use to capture authentic consumer voices, so people who actually say something by themselves. What we do with this data in our process is not to automate or do anything like that. We actually read, understand, and interpret what people say at scale. So what we actually ended up with, among other things, is a mapping of the barriers and drivers of the conversation. And you already see that the drivers are much bigger. But let me just show you a couple of examples of what this is. This is actually empathy is the feeling that these are cute little animals, and it's almost like abortion to eat them. Another one is, obviously, you see these bilateral things like price is, both driver and a barrier. Taste as well, it has a unique taste, so it's polarizing a little bit, but much more positive than negative. You see some of the animal rights conversations, and some racism around Middle Eastern refugees eating lamb, and that's sort of a bad thing. But on the positive side, you have, for example, tradition, Christmas, Easter, occasion to eat it. So what we delivered is this full cultural map of what are the positives, negatives, and the stories behind it. So this is the insight we gave to Christoph.
Exactly, and that was hugely helpful for us because the first thing we saw here, which was really important for us, in a fairly efficient way, was that, wow, there's more taste drivers than taste barriers. That was very important for us because the brief we initially received from Bord Bia already had outlined a lot of the prejudice around lamb and that people are kind of cautious and skeptic around the taste of it. So it was important for us to see there's a lot of positive discussion around taste. And what basically we did, we took all of these results from the social media listening and we used them to basically create a discussion guide for the experts. Now, in this narrative flow from this phase to the expert phase to the consumer groups, we try to be very, very succinct and efficient. So basically, condense this phase in order to be able to go broader and incorporate social media listening. So basically, normally you often do like 4 or 6 big 2-hour group discussions. Here we decide we're going to have 3 telephone interviews with expert, an event chef, an online butcher, and a catering expert. And basically, the consumer groups were 4 mini groups of 90 minutes each. So we really condensed this very much to try and be able to go broad in the overall project. But as I said, we used the learnings from Daniel to create the discussion guide for the experts. So we could talk about all these hypotheses, talk about all these drivers and barriers, and get the experts' opinion based on their decades-long experience in the field of working with meat, how they saw the drivers and barriers for lamb meat. And we then again used this to create the discussion guide for the consumers, and really then on this level get their personal stories. Here it was really about this granular detail of getting the real life stories. How did I get into lamb? What was my experience? And so on and so forth. We already knew from what Daniel had brought back to us in terms of Christmas and Easter, we already had an inkling that there was an issue around lamb having a very special significance and it being relegated to very special occasions. So we already had a bit of a feeling that maybe there isn't that much of a problem, but maybe a lack of everyday relevance for the lamb meat. And Helen's going to talk to you in a minute about the results where you will see this reflected. But before we do that, or actually talking about results, the third principle that I talked about in the beginning was to shape the whole project towards one simple and succinct output. Now, we decided really early on to have a good think about PowerPoint because PowerPoint, it takes a lot of time to produce for researchers. And on the other hand, actually it takes a lot of time to absorb for clients, which leads to the unfortunate fact that very often it's not absorbed at all beyond a very, very small circle of maybe, insight managers in the client company. So we decided to do away with the idea of PowerPoint right from the beginning and actually focus on producing a very simple Word document with all the written results, very simple. And for the rest of our energy, we focused this on bringing the designer in and having a poster output, so a really visual output. To make this happen, remember the collaboration bit that I mentioned in the beginning. It's really important that you take the designer on board at the beginning of the journey. Designers are not people who make things pretty. Well, they also make things pretty, but that's not their job. Their job is to actually conceptually understand issues and design solutions. And we should treat them that way. So basically, when you take on a designer in a project, have them be part of the project. Take them along to the field work. This is what we did in this project. Have them be part of the analysis sessions, because really only then they will be able to design a piece that will actually be succinct, helpful, impactful in the, for the client. So really our goals for this piece, and now it's, here we go, for this piece, for the output, was to have it simple, visual, and customizable. Customizable in the sense that it can live on in different ways beyond the confines of this research project. And Helen's going to talk to you about what we actually produced.
So this is our insight output. As Christoph said, it's in a poster format. I must say that initially when Christoph said he didn't want to do a PowerPoint presentation, I was a little taken aback because that is our traditional way of getting everyone around the table, going through a deck of slides. But I must say that this worked incredibly well. It worked incredibly well because it's very easy to understand, easy to navigate, and it captures the entire research process, and it's not taking each step of research and reporting it. It's pulling it all together in a narrative story, and it's very easy to navigate. So here on the left, we have a poster that talks about driving the appeal of Irish lamb in Germany. It identifies the facilitators and the barriers. It talks about the wording and the language we should use in our marketing. It talks about the imagery we should use. And essentially the results really were that people don't eat that much lamb. There is a relatively low awareness of it, that we need to create touch points for them to experience the great taste of lamb and bring them into eating lamb more often. And communicating the really great Irish lamb benefits of being from a natural, environmentally friendly country. And then on the right-hand side, we have our second map, which was very clearly outlining the step-by-step consumer journey of how they encountered lamb. So as I say, these were, we were a little bit skeptical at the start, but they worked tremendously well and they were incredibly well received. So as a client, we have we have our internal clients, so we have to share the results with our colleagues, bring them on board. They don't have a lot of time, so this was very easy to read, concise and succinct. And then also for our client companies, the lamb processors, they don't really want to come and look at a PowerPoint deck. We were able to either share these personally at one-to-one, or we could easily send them the posters where they could capture everything quite quickly all together. And then the great thing is, in Bord Bia, we've just launched or opened a Consumer Insight Center, which is a creative and inspirational center around research, insight, and using insight to drive growth. And because we had the posters rather than a PowerPoint deck, we could have them in our visual library, we could have them on our interactive screens, and we were able to use this format of output in a much greater way. So not only were we reliant on going to clients, everyone who comes through the Insight Center can also access the results of this study.
Okay, so summarizing, pulling up again our 3 principles here. To really be able to condense a large scope research brief into a supercharged concentrate, you have to find the right collaborators and you have to really plan well how to collaborate throughout the project. You have to create, from our point of view, a narrative flow so that you really don't treat your different project phases and different methodological approaches as separate steps, but actually have them kind of flow into each other. And thirdly, really shape your output so that you're telling one story and being quite sort of single-minded about kind of telling that one story, because otherwise you're sprawling out and you will have an information overload, and it will also become too time and money consuming. So this basically is our recipe for kind of answering this kind of brief.
And finally, we did have one added bonus, that we were able to use the posters in our B2B communications. So that just proved how efficient they were and succinct. And we could literally take the posters, give it to our communications agency, and they were able to create advertisements and communications for Irish lamb virtually within a day.
Thank you.
Thank you.